He was bleeding out in silence, tied to a fence post beside his children. She came barefoot from the hills, 9 months pregnant, and carried them home without saying a word. The blood had dried stiff on the collar of Sam McKinley's shirt by the time the wind shifted. Dust rolled in from the west like judgment, scraping his raw wrists against the barbed wire that bound them to the fence. The sun hadn't spared them that morning. It hadn't spared his 2 boys either, Ben, barely 9, and Wyatt, just 6, who lay slumped beside him, their lips cracked, faces burned, unmoving but still breathing. Asa had made sure of that. Even as they beat him, even as they laughed while tying his sons up like livestock, he'd whispered to them through split lips, "Don't fight. I'll get you out, I promise." But hours passed, maybe a whole day. His shoulder had been wrenched from its socket, and his vision swam with flashes of dark and white like a busted snow globe. He knew death was circling, waiting, but he wouldn't let go. Not with his boys tied there beside him, not while they still breathed. That was when she appeared. No sound announced her coming. One moment the desert was empty. The next, a shape moved against the orange sky like some myth half-birthed from sand and heat. She walked barefoot. Her dress was plain. Her stomach bulged with child, and her face, weathered, dark-eyed, streaked with something that might have been tears or sweat or both, held no expression at all. Asa blinked hard, thought he was hallucinating, but she came closer. She didn't ask who he was, didn't ask what happened, didn't even pause to consider the scene, 3 bodies tied to fence posts, vultures circling like sickle shadows overhead. She only stepped up beside the boy closest to her, Wyatt, and began to untie the wire with fingers that looked like they belonged to a woman twice her age. Her hands were scarred, her arms strong, and she didn't stop even when the wire bit into her palm and drew blood. Asa tried to speak, tried to ask why, who she was, what she was doing, how she had found them, but his voice was long gone, dried up in his throat like everything else. She didn't need him to talk anyway. She moved like someone who already knew. When Wyatt was free, she scooped him into her arms. Her breath hitched from the weight, from the child in her belly pressing hard against her lungs, but she didn't let him fall. Then she moved to Ben. It was only when she returned for Asa, grunting as she pried the barbs from his wrists, cutting her own hands in the process, that he caught a name on her lips. Not his, not theirs, but one word spoken soft, broken: Amos. And she carried him too. The cabin was hidden deep in the arroyo, its walls little more than stacked stone and rotted timber, but it had a roof and shade and water, a spring that trickled from the back of a mossy ridge like it had forgotten the rest of the world. The woman hauled all 3 of them there, one at a time. She set the boys down on a pallet of old grain sacks and rags. Then Asa, groaning, too weak to help her, she cleaned their wounds with boiled water and strips of torn dress. Fed them broth that tasted of roots and ash, still hadn't said her name. When Asaph finally found his voice, it came out like gravel. Why'd you help us?" She didn't look up, just wrung out a cloth, placed it gently over Ben's burned face, and said, "Because I remember what it was like, to be left to die alone." It wasn't until night fell and the stars began to crawl out of the velvet sky that Hassan noticed the 3 rough crosses on the hill behind the cabin. Small ones, each the size of a child. She saw him looking. "They were mine," she said, still no tremble in her voice, just the truth laid bare. "And no one came for them, no one carried them." Then she turned and walked into the dark. Next morning, Asa woke to birdsong and pain and the scent of bread, actual bread. The boys were sleeping better now, color returning to their cheeks. Outside, he heard the woman splitting wood. each strike of the axe sharp, precise, methodical. He tried to stand, failed. She came back and handed him a cup of water. He took it, studying her face, the shadows under her eyes, the gray strands in her dark hair. She was younger than she looked. "What's your name?" he asked. She paused, then, "Naomi." "Why were you out there alone?" She gave a small shake of her head, like the question didn't matter. "I wasn't alone." And her hand drifted, without thought, to her belly. 2 days passed. Asa regained enough strength to walk to the spring, though she still had to help him back. The boys explored the edge of the ravine, always staying within sight, always glancing back toward Naomi like she was some fixed point they weren't ready to let go of. He asked questions, she answered few. But at night, when the fire was low and her hands were too tired to sew or clean or stir the pot, she sat beside Asa and told stories, not hers, but old ones, of widows in storms and prophets in deserts and sons lost and found. "You a praying woman?" Asa asked once. She looked into the fire a long time. "I was, then I stopped. Now I think I'm somewhere in between." On the 4th day they came. Dust on the horizon, hooves, 6 riders, maybe 7, bandits, the ones who tied Asa and his boys to the fence, no doubt wondering why 3 corpses hadn't shown up for the coyotes. Naomi stood on the porch, rifle in hand. She wasn't shaking. "Get inside," she told Asa. "Take the boys, lock the door." "I can fight," he said, rising, teeth clenched. She looked at him, that same fire-steady gaze. "You already did." And she stepped down from the porch. The men didn't come with their guns drawn. They didn't need to. Their faces did the threatening, scars like stitched leather, eyes glinting like spent coals, and mouths curled in that slow, cruel smirk born from years of never hearing no. They rode in easy, circling the cabin like coyotes around a wounded deer, their laughter low and lazy. One of them kicked at the old chicken coop on the side of the house, scattering a pair of wild hens that had taken up residence there. Another dismounted and tapped at the porch rail with his knife, like a man playing a tune no one else could hear. Naomi stood in the center of the clearing, her rifle gripped in both hands, steady against her belly, her thumb resting right beside the trigger. The one in front, taller than the others, his coat lined with silver buttons, tipped his hat back and looked her over slowly. He spat to the side. "Well now, this ain't what I expected." "You came looking for bodies," Naomi said. "Maybe," he replied, voice calm as the breeze. "Or maybe I came looking for a man who thinks he can take what ain't his, and a woman foolish enough to think a rifle's gonna keep him." Asa, watching from the window, gritted his teeth. Ben and Wyatt were crouched behind him, wide-eyed, breathing hard. He pressed a finger to his lips, warning them to stay quiet. Naomi didn't flinch. "You tied children to a fence," she said. "You don't get to talk about what's yours." The man grinned. "They was payment. Your rancher friend don't seem to understand how debts work out here. We was gonna leave water, eventually." She didn't move, didn't blink. Then he took one step too close. A flash of movement, a thundercrack echoing off the canyon walls, and the man's hat flew clean off his head as Naomi's shot cut the air. The next few seconds blurred. Shouts, hooves, more gunfire, the sharp whine of bullets splitting bark and shattering stone. Asa pushed the boys back behind the thick table and grabbed Naomi's second rifle from where it leaned by the hearth. His shoulder still screamed from the strain, but he fought through it, shouldering the weapon and taking aim through the broken window. He saw her, Naomi, standing firm, reloading with hands that barely trembled. Her face was calm, not fearless but resigned, as though this had always been her road, and she'd simply waited long enough to walk it. One of the riders charged. Naomi didn't back down. She stepped to the left, fired, and the horse bucked wild as its rider slumped sideways, falling hard into the dust. The other men hesitated. They weren't used to resistance, not from a woman, not from someone alone, not in this dead stretch of desert where the law didn't ride anymore. Then Asaf fired. He hit the edge of a boot, didn't matter. The message was clear, she wasn't alone. And they were outnumbered. By sunset, they were gone, two of them bleeding into the dirt, the rest limping back toward the hills, one riderless horse trailing behind like a ghost too stubborn to stay buried. Naomi sat on the porch, rifle across her knees, her face unreadable. Asad joined her, lowering himself carefully to the step beside her. His shoulder ached like fire, but the boys were inside, safe, and he was breathing. That was enough for now. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded once. "They'll come back," she said. "I know." They sat in silence. "Was that your husband's rifle?" Asad asked quietly. She looked down at the worn stock, the initials carved into the wood. "No," she said, "he never learned to shoot. He waited. He died in the second year of the drought," she added. "Fever took him, same as my children, one by one." She didn't say more, didn't need to. In the days that followed, Asad recovered faster than expected. His boys began smiling again, especially Wyatt, who took to following Naomi around like a shadow. She taught him how to gather water from cactus, how to trap jackrabbits, how to listen for the sound of weather in the rocks. Ben was quieter, older in the eyes, but he watched her too. Studied the way she moved, the way she never wasted motion or word. She was a lesson neither of them had expected, and neither of them would forget. Asad offered to leave after a week. Said he'd take his boys, find somewhere safer, somewhere more civilized. Naomi didn't argue, just nodded, went back to sewing. But the next morning, the wagon was broken. The wheel shattered clean through, axe marks in the wood. She didn't say a word, just handed Asad a cup of coffee and sat beside him like nothing had happened. "I guess we're staying a little longer," he said. She didn't smile, but she didn't walk away either. By the second week, they began rebuilding the fence. Naomi showed the boys how to strip the old wire, how to treat the posts with oil and ash. Asad dug the holes. He was slower than he'd been before, but he worked without complaint. The rhythm helped. So did the company. They shared meals now, shared stories. One night by the fire, Naomi told them about her youngest child, a girl named Ruth who had laughed like wind chimes and danced barefoot in the mud after summer storms. "She never made it to 4, Naomi said, her voice low, "but she made it matter." Wyatt leaned his head against her shoulder and fell asleep there. Trouble returned on the 15th day. Not the bandits yet, but a traveler. A man on foot, gaunt and sunburned, staggering into the clearing like a man chased by ghosts. Naomi spotted him first. She stood in the doorway, rifle lowered but ready. He collapsed near the well, muttering something about sickness, about men dying in the hills, about a fever spreading like fire in dry brush. Asad knelt beside him. The man's skin burned with heat, his eyes bloodshot, his lips cracked. They moved him into the barn, isolated him. Naomi boiled herbs, treated him the best she could. But he didn't last the night. Ben got sick the next day. Then Wyatt. Naomi didn't sleep. She brewed potions, wrapped the boys in cool cloths, sat by their side while Asa prayed under his breath, repeating the same few words over and over like a man trying to rewrite fate. Please don't take them too. She never left their side. On the fourth night of the fever, Ben stopped breathing. For 30 seconds, maybe less. But it felt like eternity. Naomi slammed her fist against his chest, blew air into his lungs, whispered something Assad didn't catch, some language he didn't know. Ben gasped, coughed, and came back. Naomi wept then, not loud, not desperate, but her shoulders shook and Assad didn't pretend not to see it. He knelt beside her, took her hand. You saved them. She shook her head. No, I just refused to lose another. The fever passed, but something else took root. In the quiet, in the way Assad looked at her now, the way the boys clung to her like she'd always been there. Something old, something new. Not love, not yet. But the shape of it, waiting to grow. The morning light came gold through the broken clouds, like grace spilling onto the land. Naomi stood in the garden she hadn't touched in nearly 3 years, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, hands deep in the soil. Asa watched her from the porch. There was something about the way she moved, measured, determined, not trying to hurry anything back into bloom, but working like the earth owed her something and she was going to collect, one seed at a time. Ben stood nearby holding a dented tin pail, watching her dig each trench like it was a magic trick. Wyatt picked at a stalk of wild onion and asked questions Naomi never answered directly. She didn't waste words, not even on the young. Asa was mending a fence rail when he spotted the smoke. It curled low at first, barely visible against the midday haze, but it thickened fast, black and rising, too dark for a cooking fire, too near to be someone else's chimney. He set the hammer down, reached instinctively for the rifle Naomi had insisted stay within arm's reach. He didn't shout, didn't startle the boys, just walked slowly across the clearing, eyes narrowed, watching the sky. Naomi joined him before he could call her. That's 2 ridges east, she said, her voice flat. You expecting anyone? Asa asked. No. He glanced at the boys. Might be nothing. No, she said again, more firmly this time. Nothing burns like that unless something's gone wrong. They didn't argue about it. That was a rhythm they'd found. She saw what she saw. He knew better than to question it. Within the hour they were packed. She loaded jerky, water skins, 2 knives, and 3 guns into Asa's saddlebag. She told the boys to stay close, to mind each word he gave them like it was scripture. And then she swung herself up onto the old mule she hadn't ridden in years and nodded once. I'll be back in 2 days, she said. Naomi, Asa started, but she cut him off with a glance. If I'm not, she said, then you'll know what to do. And with that she rode east. 2 days passed. Then a third. And the smoke returned, this time farther west. Asa paced the porch at night. The boys didn't ask questions, not anymore. They helped keep the fire going. They took to watching the ridge like soldiers in a fort. By the 5th day, Asa couldn't stand it. He saddled the mare, packed a rifle and 3 days' food, told the boys to stay behind, stay hidden, stay fed, stay alive. He scrawled a note on the table Naomi had carved her initials into and tucked it under the coffee tin. Then he rode after her. The trail was hard. hoofprints washed out by a storm, brush torn in too many directions to follow cleanly. He kept to instinct. Naomi would have hugged the base of the canyon, avoided open ridges, trusted the buzzards to lead her before any map did. He found the first body on the second day, a man in his 30s, boots missing, shirt torn, an arrow clean through his shoulder. He wasn't Apache, not by the markings, not by the skin. Settler but not local, not someone Asa recognized. The body had been left out for days, face stiff, dried blood caked around the wound. He died sitting up, looked like he'd been watching something over the hill. Asaph followed his line of sight. That's when he saw the horses, 6 of them, tied low in the gulch, half hidden behind rock and scrub. No saddles, packs scattered, no riders. The camp was abandoned. No fire pit, no tools, just one thing left behind, a strip of cotton cloth torn into a triangle and tucked under a flat stone. Naomi's scarf. She had been here, and she had left it for him to find. He rode harder then. Didn't stop when the sun dropped. Didn't flinch at the howls in the hills. He slept for 2 hours on the back of the mare while she walked, head down, trusting the road the same way Asa trusted Naomi, without needing a reason. By dusk on the 4th day, he smelled the blood before he saw it. 2 more bodies. And Naomi, standing alone in the clearing, face streaked with ash, her hands red up to the wrists. Behind her, a fire burned in a shallow pit, black smoke curling toward the sky. She didn't speak when she saw him, just looked at him with eyes that hadn't blinked in hours. He slid off the saddle, walked slowly to her side. "I found the scarf," he said. She nodded. "They took 3 girls," she said. He waited. "I got them back," she added, "but they're too scared to move yet." Asa looked past her and saw the cave entrance, just beyond the rocks, shadows flickering. "I'll build the shelter," he said quietly. "You get them water." They stayed 3 nights in that valley. The girls didn't speak much, not to Asa, barely to Naomi. But they followed her like ducklings, clutching the rough shawls she'd made from old coats and whispering words in a language Asa didn't know. One of them couldn't have been more than 6. The oldest looked about 12. All 3 had eyes like shattered glass, something broken but still sharp. On the 4th morning, Naomi turned to Asa. "We bring them back," she said. The return trip was harder than the ride out. Not for the roads, but for the weight of it. The girls didn't cry. They just walked, one foot after another, like the desert demanded tribute and they'd been chosen to pay it. The boys lit up when they saw Naomi come riding in. Wyatt ran to her. Ben held back until he saw the girls, and then his smile faded. "They been hurt?" he asked softly. Naomi nodded. Ben didn't ask more, just offered the oldest girl a piece of apple he'd been saving. She didn't take it, but she looked at him like maybe she'd eat again someday. Asa started building again. A 3rd room added to the cabin, then a 2nd outhouse, then another water tank hauled from a trader 2 towns east. The days were filled with work, the nights with stories. The girls didn't speak at first. But one night, Naomi found the youngest tracing a horse in the dirt with a stick. She sat beside her and drew another horse, and another. Then the girl looked up and said, "Thank you," in English. Just that. And Naomi wept for the 2nd time. Trouble didn't come again for a while. But Asa knew it would. It always did. So he trained the boys to shoot better, taught the oldest girl how to hold a knife, Let Naomi show the rest how to vanish into the rocks if the need ever came. But in between the lessons, there was laughter. There were peaches in the garden. There were 6 plates at the table now. 7, when Asa remembered to make Naomi eat. They sat in silence sometimes, but it wasn't the hollow kind anymore. It was full of something else. Full of presence, of peace. Or the closest thing to it this land would allow. It was the 6th night since Naomi had returned with the girls, and for the first time in weeks the house was quiet. Not just the quiet of children finally asleep, but the kind of silence that settled into the beams, made the floors feel still, made the wind outside sound softer. Asa sat at the table, sharpening his oldest knife, the one his father had given him when he turned 15. Naomi was beside him, mending a torn sleeve, the needle flashing faintly under the oil lamp. Their hands worked in rhythm, no words exchanged. But something lingered in the space between them, something heavier than silence, more potent than sleep. "Where did you bury them?" Asa asked at last, not looking up from the blade. Naomi didn't answer for a while. "Same valley," she finally said. "Under the big cedar, they won't be found." He nodded. That was enough. The children slept in the new room, 2 beds built from broken fence rails, patched with horse blankets and pillows stuffed with dried grass and feathers. The youngest girl, May, had taken to curling up with Ben each night like he was her own brother. She didn't speak much, but her hand always found his as they drifted to sleep. The middle girl, Lion, had started waking up screaming twice a night. Naomi would rise without a word, sit beside her, hold her until the shaking stopped. The oldest, Gia, refused to sleep lying down. She kept her back against the wall, legs crossed, knife tucked under her shirt. They hadn't asked for her story. They didn't need to. They knew enough. On the 7th morning, Asa woke to find Gia gone. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky had gone that strange shade of gray-blue that always meant frost. He didn't panic. Not at first. Just dressed, grabbed his coat and walked to the ridge. He found her standing near the goat pen, arms folded, watching the far hills. "I can smell them," she said, without turning around. He stepped closer. "Who?" "Men," she said. "3 of them, maybe 4. Asa nodded. "How long?" "They've been close 2 nights. Too far to see us, but close enough to track." She turned to him then, her face unreadable. "You need to hide the others." "No," Asa said calmly. "We need to prepare." By nightfall, the house was a fortress. Barrels were rolled in front of windows. Traps were set in the brush. Naomi mounted lookout posts, high ground behind the barn and the old root cellar beneath the hill. She had the boys digging a fire trench near the path, taught Lion how to reload, and placed May with Ben in the safest corner of the house, the rifle within reach. Gia refused to stay inside. She stood beside Asa as he lit the lanterns around the porch, knife still tucked beneath her coat. "You trust me?" she asked quietly. "I do," Asa said. "Then if they get in, don't stop me." He didn't argue, he knew better. The attack came before dawn. They didn't knock, just thundered down the slope like wolves trying to surprise, to overwhelm, but Naomi had counted on that. The tripwire exploded beneath the first rider, his horse shrieking as it reared and threw him into the fire trench. The second tripped over the barrels, gun firing wide, and Asa picked him off before his boot hit the porch. 2 more on foot flanked the left, tried to circle behind the barn, but Gia was already there. She moved faster than he'd seen before, blade catching firelight as she knocked one man down and drove her knife into the space just below his ribs. The last man tried to run. Naomi shot him in the leg before he reached the ridge. The fire burned for 2 days. They didn't bury the bodies. Naomi refused, said the coyotes needed to eat too. Asa agreed. He didn't have the stomach for digging graves anymore. That night Gia finally slept lying down. Lion didn't scream once. May called Ben brother without whispering. Something shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, but like snow melting underfoot. Spring came early that year. The frost vanished in a week. Crops sprouted faster than they had in seasons. Asa watched the garden grow with a strange awe, as if the earth had finally remembered what it meant to give back. Naomi smiled more. Not big smiles, nothing that showed teeth, but the kind that lasted, the kind that reached her eyes. She spent mornings with the girls, teaching them to sew, to mend boots, to speak English better. The boys began calling her Ma without realizing it. She didn't correct them. She just nodded, as if that had always been her name. One afternoon, while the wind was low and the sun hung lazy in the sky, a stranger rode in. He didn't carry a rifle, didn't wear a badge, just a long coat, a wide hat, and a face so lined with road dust it took Asa a minute to realize he wasn't a threat. "Looking for someone," the man said. "Name?" Asa asked. "Gia," he replied, "my daughter." Naomi stepped onto the porch before Asa could answer. "That's not her name anymore," she said. The man's eyes narrowed. "She was taken from us," he said. "She was sold," Naomi replied. "You let it happen." He looked down, couldn't answer. "I raised her," he muttered. "I didn't know." "You came too late." The man swallowed. "She's still mine." "No," Gia said, stepping out from behind Naomi. "I'm hers." She walked past Asa, past the porch, until she stood 3 feet from the man who claimed her. "You gave me up," she said. He opened his mouth to speak. "You don't get to ask for me now." And then she turned and walked back into the house. He didn't follow. Just stood there, hat in his hands, until Naomi stepped down. "She doesn't hate you," Naomi said. "She just stopped needing you." He nodded slowly. "Is she safe here?" "She's home." The man left that afternoon. Didn't look back. The house grew louder after that. Not with fear, not with footsteps, but with life. With songs Ben sang while hauling water. With the sound of Wyatt learning to play fiddle. With Gia reading out loud to May, who had started writing her name in the dirt outside. With Naomi laughing, soft and sudden, like a sound she'd forgotten was inside her. Asa carved new initials into the porch post that spring. JMBWLM. Every child's name. He didn't say what they meant, but he traced them every time he passed. The past didn't vanish. It never does. Some nights the girls still woke screaming. Sometimes Asa would stand at the fence, staring east, waiting for smoke that didn't come. But the ranch stood taller, the walls stronger, the roots deeper. What they built could not be stolen, because it had never been bought. It had been chosen. The sun rose slower now. Or maybe it was just Asa who moved slower in the mornings, shoulders heavier, breaths deeper, eyes drawn longer to the way dust danced in the light that bled through the warped slats of the barn. He stood outside that morning watching the gate swing slightly in the wind, a familiar stillness sitting over the land. Not quiet, not lifeless, but the kind of peace that only came after the hardest kind of living. Inside the house, Naomi was at the stove, stirring something with a worn wooden spoon, humming a hymn she hadn't sung in years. Gia was sewing patches into a shirt Ben had ripped climbing the tree behind the barn. Lion was reading aloud to Wyatt, voice steady now, no longer skipping words like she used to when fear lived in her throat. May sat cross-legged at the hearth, tracing letters into ash, tongue sticking out as she concentrated hard on getting the loops right. And for a moment, just a small one, Asa allowed himself to believe that maybe this was it. Maybe they'd finally outrun the worst. But peace in the desert never came untested. That evening, just as the sky turned the color of old bruise, a horse rode in carrying a man who didn't smile, didn't dismount, and didn't blink when Asa stepped onto the porch. He was tall, sharp-eyed, and carried a folded paper in one hand and a pistol holstered too high on the hip, like he wanted it noticed. "You Asa Booker?" he asked. "I am," Asa replied, stepping down. The man unfolded the paper and read it like a sermon. "There's a bounty out for a woman matching the description of one Naomi Blackwell, suspected of harboring fugitives, accessory to murder and theft of property deemed bonded." The words cracked the evening like thunder. Naomi stepped out onto the porch behind Asa before he could call her back. Her eyes didn't flicker. Her shoulders didn't drop. "That all you got?" she asked. The man looked up. "I got orders to bring you in, ma'am, dead or breathing." Asa's hand moved, slow but deliberate, toward the shotgun resting against the porch rail. "Your orders don't mean a thing on this land," he said. "They will," the man replied. "Law's coming behind me, 10 men, maybe more, days' ride from here. You can hand her over, or you can watch your house burn again." Gia stepped outside next, knife on her belt. Lion came with her, holding the rifle like it was part of her. "No one's handing her over," Gia said. "You the killer girl?" the man asked, amused. "I'm the one who survived," she said. He didn't smile. He just turned his horse and rode off without another word. But he didn't need to say anything else, because war had been declared. The night burned hot with preparation. They didn't waste a minute. Naomi drew a map on the table using flour, marking every entrance, every weak spot, every tree or stone that could shield a man with a rifle. Asa reinforced the doors. The boys carried water to the cellar, barrel after barrel. Gia taught Lion how to fight close if the gun jammed. Ben helped May collect the sharp stones and broken glass to line the windowsills. No one asked if they were going to win. They only prepared like their lives depended on it, because they did. At dawn, the dust rose in the east. Not the kind of dust the wind kicked up or the cattle made when they wandered. This was the dust of riders, too many to count, moving with purpose, like a fist closing around the throat of a house that had dared to stand taller than its past. The first shot came from Naomi. It split the silence like judgment, dropping a man from his horse before he could draw. The second came from Asa, clean, efficient. Then chaos. The men were spread wide, trying to circle the house, but every angle was watched. Gia dropped 2 before they got within 20 feet of the barn. Lion, shaking so hard her teeth chattered, still managed to reload and fire again, her third shot catching a man in the knee, stopping him cold. Ben and Wyatt had hidden in the loft with long nails and a bucket of oil. When one rider broke through the side fence, they dropped the oil and lit it, turning the fence into flame and sending the man screaming back into the dirt. May huddled inside, clutching the dog, whispering prayers she barely remembered learning. The fight raged for hours. By noon, the sun hung like a hammer above them, baking the blood into the dirt. Asa took a bullet to the shoulder and didn't fall. Naomi's left arm was grazed, but she kept firing. Gia ran out of bullets and switched to her knife, and by the time it was over, by the time the last man turned and galloped away, dragging another behind him, they stood breathing hard, bleeding, but alive. The ground was littered with the bodies of men who thought they could break something that had already been broken and rebuilt stronger. Naomi collapsed into Asa's arms that night, not from pain but from relief. No one said anything for a long time. They just sat together, still, breathing, whole. The town tried to send another group 3 weeks later. But the sheriff, an old man with a conscience too late for most things, rode out ahead of them, told them what had happened, what he'd seen. "Those people don't need law," he said. "They built their own." The town never came back. By the time summer turned to fall, the ranch was something else entirely. The scars still showed on their arms, their hearts, but something else had taken root. Lion started teaching May how to read. Gia planted flowers by the fence post. Wyatt built a scarecrow in the field and gave it a hat. Ben learned how to fix the roof without falling through. Naomi found an old chest in the barn and filled it with keepsakes. Gia's first set of boots, a button from Asa's first coat, a dried flower from the day May said "Mama" without flinching. Asa added a room to the house. Then another. And another. Because they kept finding people. Orphans, lost girls, broken boys. People who had nowhere else to go. And the house always had room. One day, a woman rode in from the south. Pregnant, tired, alone. Asa opened the door without asking. "Come in," he said. She stepped inside. Naomi rose to her feet. "Welcome home," she said. The house took on a rhythm after the last attack, not just in the way it creaked or the wind pushed through the eaves, but in the way people moved within it. It was a rhythm of survival turned into life. Asa noticed it in the smallest things, how Gia now swept the front porch every morning like she was guarding a temple, how Lion whispered the names of every seedling she planted, as if giving each a blessing. How Naomi no longer sat by the window scanning the horizon for danger, but for travelers, for anyone in need. And they came. Not often, not many, but enough that the rooms Asa built were filled quicker than he'd planned. The ranch was becoming something other than a home. It was becoming a refuge, a last stop for the brokenhearted. And though it started with 5 girls and a man trying to keep the past from stealing the present, it grew into something that didn't quite have a name. Naomi called it grace. Asa just called it home. But peace in the West was never the end of the story. One cold morning in early winter, just as frost began nipping at the fields, a boy rode in on a mule, eyes wide with terror, boots covered in blood that wasn't his. He collapsed off the saddle before anyone could ask his name. Wyatt and Ben carried him into the house, while Naomi wrapped him in wool and whispered comfort. When the boy woke, he said only one thing. "They're coming." Naomi's blood went cold. "Who's coming?" Asa asked. The boy looked at him like a man looks at thunder, too stunned to do anything but point toward the horizon. "They've got women, kids, they're rounding 'em up. Said anyone harboring orphans is breaking the law now. Said they're gonna make examples out of folks who think they can make families out of nothing. Said they're common here next." The room went still. Gia's grip tightened on the knife at her hip. Lion looked at Naomi with wide eyes, not out of fear, but out of readiness. "We can't run," Naomi said. "Not again." "We don't," Asa said. "We build." And so they did. Not walls, but a plan. Not a fortress, but a message. They sent riders to nearby homesteads, the ones that had ever known kindness, people who'd once been helped, fed, or sheltered by the Booker Ranch. A few came riding in that same night. Others came the next day. By the end of the week, there were nearly 30 people camped on the land. Men, women, children, black, white, Apache, Mexican. None of them alike in name, but all of them family by choice. It was Lion who stood before them all and said it best. "They don't get to decide who's worth saving," she said. "We already decided." Naomi stepped beside her. "This isn't a ranch anymore. It's a line in the sand." The enemy came at dawn 2 days later. 10 wagons deep, with iron branding rods and chains that gleamed in the sun. Men in gray coats, flags with unfamiliar symbols, a judge with papers, a preacher with a collar too white to have ever known suffering. They rode inconfident, arrogant, until they saw the rifles waiting, the people standing shoulder to shoulder, until they heard a little girl's voice, May's, ring out from the roof. "You leave now," she shouted, "or you stay forever." It wasn't bravado. It was prophecy. The man in charge dismounted, boots crunching over frost. He walked toward Asa, not bothering with a greeting. "You're harboring government property," he said. "No," Asa said. "I'm feeding children, loving them, teaching them. That stopped being a crime when the Lord died for every last one of us." The preacher flinched at that. But the judge sneered, "You'll hang for this." Naomi stepped forward. "Then hang me first," she said. Gia beside her, Lion beside her, Ben and Wyatt behind, the other orphans, new and old, filling in the line. It was a moment no one forgot, a line not just drawn in the dirt, but burned into the memory of every soul who saw it. Because they didn't run. They didn't beg. They stood. And when the soldiers realized they'd have to drag each and every child by force, through the screams of the only parents they'd known, they faltered. One man threw down his rifle. Then another. And another. The judge barked orders, but his men were already turning back. It wasn't a battle. It was a surrender of evil to something greater. To conviction. To grace. To a family that refused to be unmade. After that, the ranch didn't return to normal. Because normal had been rewritten. The woman Naomi had taken in, Margaret, gave birth to twin girls on the floor of the old parlor. Gia was the one to catch them, hands steady, tears streaming. Lion began keeping records, names, birthdays, stories, so none of them would ever be forgotten again. Wyatt built a new bunkhouse, painted blue. Ben dug a new well, deeper and cleaner than the last. And Asa carved names into wood, one by one, every soul who passed through. Not into graves. Into the gate. So they'd always know who was welcome. Always remember who they were. And who they belonged to. The years passed. Babies turned to children. Children to teens. Some left. Some stayed. Some wrote letters that arrived dusty and folded from 1,000 miles away, thanking the ranch for giving them a name, a chance, a place in the world. No one ever forgot. And no one ever asked why it started. Because they knew. It started because someone had to believe love could outrun blood. That kindness was a legacy too. And it had a name. Home. Winter came with a sharpness that cut through even the thickest wool. The wind carried sand like razors, whistling across the hills and tearing through the edges of Naomi's coat as she stepped outside that morning. The ranch sat quiet, blanketed in pale frost, but beneath that hush was something else. A hum, a pulse. The ranch was alive now, living, breathing, waiting. Naomi bent to collect the firewood she'd chopped the night before, but a tiny gasp from behind her made her pause. May stood on the porch barefoot, arms wrapped around herself. Her nightdress fluttered in the breeze. "You're cold," Naomi said gently. The girl nodded, teeth chattering. Instead of scolding, Naomi just scooped her up, carried her back inside, and sat with her near the fire. She didn't say a word. She just held her close until the tremble left her bones. That was the thing about children who'd survived too much too early. They didn't cry for long. They didn't ask for help. But when they came to you, silent and wide-eyed, it wasn't weakness. It was trust. And that trust was something Naomi had come to hold like glass. Fragile, precious, something worth guarding with every ounce of herself. As the day unfolded, more children drifted into the kitchen one by one, as if drawn by the warmth or the smell of bread Lion had put in the oven. Gia was humming softly as she patched a torn jacket at the table. Wyatt, older now, had taken to repairing tools in the evenings. Ben helped Lion cut carrots, though he ate every third one. And he sat by the window, his eyes watching the road out front like always. It had been nearly a year since the standoff with the judge and the soldiers. Word had spread across counties, towns, territories. Most folks stayed away. A few tried to visit out of curiosity, but none got past the gate without being offered a place to sit and something warm to drink. It wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was legend. But even legends weren't immune to sorrow. It began with Naomi's cough. She hid it for weeks, brushing it off as dryness or dust in the air. But Hassan noticed how she tired more easily, how she lingered near the fire even when the room was warm, how she winced when lifting buckets from the well. He didn't confront her, not yet, but he started rising earlier, splitting more wood, feeding the animals she used to tend. And when she smiled at him in quiet thanks, he said nothing, because he knew her pride wasn't stubbornness. It was protection for the kids, for the peace they'd carved out of the wilderness. But one night, Naomi didn't come to supper. Lion found her on the floor of the root cellar, breath shallow, skin like parchment. The children gathered around her bed. Gia whispered prayers in Mandarin. Wyatt sat like stone at the edge of the mattress. Ben clutched her hand with the grip of someone afraid to let go of the only anchor he'd ever known. Naomi smiled through the pain. "You listen to me," she whispered. "Don't you dare grieve like you're being left behind. I'm not going far, just ahead a little ways. And when your time comes, I'll be right there waiting, right at the gate." She made them promise to keep the ranch going, to never let another orphan sleep in the cold if they could help it, to love each other even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. And then, as snow dusted the windows and the wind sang like an old lullaby, Naomi exhaled one last time. The house didn't break that night. It held, because she'd built it too. Her grave was marked by a simple stone near the tree she planted her first spring on the ranch. It bore only her name, the year, and a line Asa carved himself. "Mother to the lost, keeper of the gate." The grief didn't vanish with time, but it softened, became something you could carry, became part of the place itself. And life, as it always does, went on. Children kept arriving, some with bruises, some with silence, some too young to speak their names. The family grew in lopsided, beautiful ways. Gia married a traveling blacksmith who'd come looking for work but stayed for her smile. They built a little house beside the barn, filled it with music and twin boys who ran like fire through the grass. Lion took to teaching full-time, reading, writing, math, and started a schoolhouse in the West Field. She kept a jar of old nails on the desk as a reminder. Every broken thing can still hold something together. Wyatt grew into a man so quietly you'd miss it if you blinked. He kept the books, fixed the fences, and when a one-legged preacher stumbled onto the ranch one summer and asked to stay a while, Wyatt gave him his own room and never asked questions. Ben became the heart of the kitchen, baking, laughing, sneaking sweets to the younger kids when no one was looking. He never left the ranch, never wanted to. And Asa grew older but never slower. He wore the ache in his joints like a badge, his beard turning silver in streaks. He was always at the gate, sunrise to sundown, waiting for the next soul to appear on that road like Naomi used to do. He kept a chair beside him, just in case. One day a rider came, a woman, cloaked and dusty, with 2 children pressed close to her hips and another in her arms. Asa stood. The woman raised her head. Her eyes were sharp, tired, watchful. But when she saw the gate, saw the names carved in weathered wood, she wept. "I heard there was a place," she said. Asa nodded. "There is." She stepped forward, hesitating. Do I need to earn my keep?" "No, ma'am," he said. "You already have." And he stepped aside, letting her walk through the gate, 3 children at her heels, into a place where sorrow didn't vanish, but it was met, where pain didn't define but was heard, where names were more than what you were born with. They were chosen, offered, shared. A place where orphans became daughters, where strangers became fathers, where love was louder than blood, where the ranch never closed its gate. Not once, not ever. The wind rolled gently over the plains that morning. No screaming storm, no dust-thick sky, just a hush that settled across the ranch like a promise. Asa woke as he always did before the sun had the nerve to climb the horizon and sat for a long time at the window, nursing tea that had long gone cold. He wasn't waiting for anything in particular, not anymore. But the habit was there, etched into the bones, eyes on the road, ears tuned to silence, heart listening for a knock or a footstep, or the fragile cry of another soul lost in the wide world. They still came. Not every day, not even every season, but just often enough to remind him the gate wasn't just a piece of wood, it was a welcome stretched across generations. Downstairs the house had changed. What was once a simple ranch home had grown with time. Walls added, roofs extended, whole rooms stitched on like patchwork. A schoolroom, a nursery, a kitchen big enough to feed 20. It didn't matter how many came, they always found a way to fit. The children who'd once been frightened shadows were now men and women with stories of their own. Gia's sons, both taller than her now, were heading east for college. Wyatt had built a new barn nearly on his own. Lion's daughter had taken to painting the walls of the schoolhouse with wild color, turning every lesson into a mural. Ben, despite teasing otherwise, had never left the kitchen, and thank heaven for that, Asa thought, sipping his tea. But Naomi's room remained untouched. No one dared clear it. Not because it was sacred, not because they were afraid, simply because her absence had never truly taken. The way she'd poured herself into this land, these lives, it felt as though her fingerprints still pressed into the windowsills, her laugh still lingered in the pantry. Her portrait hung over the fireplace, framed in cedar Asa had carved himself. And outside near the tree was her stone. Most days Asa passed it with a nod, a word or two beneath his breath. Sometimes he sat by it for hours, not mourning, just talking. Today he sat there longer than usual. "They're all right," he said. "They've become what you saw in them, better than I ever was." He paused, hands clasped. "You were right about love, Naomi. I thought it'd end with us, that I'd used up all I had, but I was wrong. You left the door open." Footsteps stirred the grass behind him. He turned to see a boy, no older than 12, standing at the edge of the fence, eyes darting, a sack slung over one shoulder. Thin, cautious, too young to look so old in the eyes. Asa rose slowly. "You hungry?" he asked. The boy didn't speak. "That's all right, come on." He opened the gate. The boy followed. As they walked, Asa glanced down at him. "Got a name?" The boy hesitated, then Luke. Asa smiled. "Good name, mine's Asa." They stepped onto the porch, where the sun was finally making its climb. Inside, the kitchen buzzed with warmth, Ben flipping cornbread, Lion laughing at something Wyatt said, Gia carrying a stack of books to the table. No one blinked at the stranger. No one questioned. A place that had seen every kind of scar had no need for introductions. "Wash up, Luke," Asa said. "Breakfast's almost ready." The boy's eyes flicked from face to face. Suspicion gave way to uncertainty, then to something quieter. He nodded. Later that week, the boy would speak of a mother he lost to fever, a town that wouldn't feed him, a name he'd stopped answering to until Asa asked. But for now, it was enough to sit in a chair that had waited for him all along. And Asa, back at his post near the gate, leaned against the fence as the sun rose higher, casting long light over the land he once thought would die quiet. But it hadn't, because kindness had taken root here, because Naomi had believed that no one should be turned away, because family wasn't about birthright, it was about showing up again and again when it mattered. Years would pass. Some would leave, some would return. Marriages, births, even death. The gates stayed open. The stories never ended, just folded into each other like pages in a book too beloved to close. One day, when Asa no longer woke before the dawn, when his chair sat empty but not abandoned, Lion's daughter, grown now, took the morning watch. She sat where he used to, eyes on the road, waiting. She wouldn't have to wait long. A girl would come, and she'd be scared and thin and silent. But the ranch would open its arms again. Because that's what family did. That's what Naomi built. And nothing, not time, not pain, not death, could undo it. They buried the last of the dead with shovels fashioned from planks and raw resolve, near a dry creek bed where the earth finally gave. The desert didn't part easily, like it didn't trust the dead to stay buried. But with the widow's hands blistered and bleeding and Jeb's back screaming from days of digging, they got it done. 4 shallow graves. No crosses. Just a circle of stones around each one and the silent promise that they wouldn't be forgotten. After that, the ranch turned quiet again. Not the kind of silence that used to follow Jeb around like a ghost, one that fed on the absence of voices and the dust drifting through empty windows, but a kind that felt earned. earned in bruises and blood and the stubborn beat of hearts that refused to give up on one another. It was different now. Not easier, just warmer. Marla stayed, of course she did. Not because she had nowhere else to go. Not because she'd grown used to the rhythm of fence mending and firewood stacking and the 5 pairs of boots that sat by the door each night, but because the kids loved her. And Jeb had stopped saying goodbye in his head every morning he saddled up. That was something. It started small. She took over the kitchen like it had always been hers, refusing to let any of the children go hungry again. They were never thin to begin with, not in spirit, but now their bellies stayed full and their laughter filled the rafters. She sang sometimes, little songs in half-breaths while stirring pots. Jeb didn't know the words, but he knew the tune. He watched her with a quiet awe, watched her pull weeds from the garden with a baby balanced on her hip, watched her fix a splinter in Grace's foot with the same care she used to soothe Sam's night terrors. She even stitched the torn saddlebag that had given him trouble for months. Every stitch a sentence she never said aloud. I'm staying. I see you. I want this too. And for Jeb, that was the loudest thing of all. Spring came in fits. The wind stopped biting and the nights grew shyly warmer. Flowers started sprouting where none had dared grow before. On one such morning, with dew still clinging to the window and the smell of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen, Marla found him standing alone by the fence. He was staring at the horizon, same place the men had come from, same direction she'd carried him and the kids away from with blood on her dress and fury in her bones. "You're thinking about them again," she said gently, wiping her hands on her apron as she stepped beside him. Jeb nodded, not needing to ask who she meant. "I keep wondering why they came at all. There's nothing here but dust." She tilted her head. "Not anymore." He turned toward her, eyes tired but no longer haunted. "You saved my children, carried us like we were worth something." "You were," she said. "You are." The silence settled again, not awkward, never awkward but full, pregnant with things neither of them had dared speak. Until he did. "I never thought I'd raise them alone, never thought someone like you would stay." Marla swallowed hard, her hand brushed his. "I didn't come here looking for a home, Jeb, but it found me anyway." Later that week, Sam brought home a dying colt he found in a dry gully. It was shivering, near collapse, all bones and mud. Marla and the kids nursed it back with blankets and broth and sleepless nights. The colt survived. And that's how it went. A ranch that had once been a graveyard of echoes became a cradle of second chances. It wasn't perfect. Caleb still woke crying sometimes. Anna wouldn't speak to strangers. Grace picked at her nails when she got nervous, and Sam still flinched at loud noises. But they laughed, and they lived, and they ran across the fields like they owned them. One night, Marla walked into the barn to find Jeb fixing a broken hinge on the stall gate. The moonlight slanted across his shoulders, painting him in silver and shadow. "You know," she said, her voice barely more than breath, "the boys asked me today if I was their new ma." Jeb didn't look up, just kept working. "What'd you tell them?" "I told them not yet." Her voice trembled, but only just. "Told them it was up to you." The wrench slipped from his hand. He turned slowly. "Up to me." She nodded, swallowing a smile. "You think I'd carry 4 near-dead men across a canyon just to leave before the story ends?" That night, in the same spot they'd nearly died months ago, tied to a fence, praying for someone, anyone, to see them, he got down on one knee. No ring, just a promise that she'd never carry anything alone again. The children screamed when they found out. Sam wept. Grace hugged her so hard it hurt. Caleb asked if they were still keeping the colt. Anna smiled, a real one. And when the ceremony came, quiet and small with just the preacher and the wind and the sound of wild horses running far in the distance, Marla wore the same dress she'd nearly bled to death in. Washed, mended, reborn. Life didn't get easier.